Mobile Suit Gundam. Starting as a hit sci-fi anime in the late 1970s, this franchise has grown to become a worldwide phenomenon with several more shows, movies, games, and even life-size giant moving robots. In the realm of collectible hobbies, Gundam has been a decades-long mainstay with its expansive line of Gundam plastic models, or gunpla for short. Now, Bandai is taking it to a new frontier in the world of TCGs with the new Gundam card game, as well as bringing the spirit of gunpla to the world of miniatures with Gundam Assemble. Today, we're diving into a brand new product that seeks to bridge the gap between these different hobby lines. Welcome back, guys, it's Colin with the Sun Pirates TCG channel. So this is a very momentous weekend, as this is the release of all the new starter decks, and as you can see, we have each of the 4 new Gundam Assemble sets, which include both the starter deck as well as the miniatures for the new Gundam Assemble game. Now granted, Gundam Assemble won't be coming out until 2026, but it's still kind of cool that we get an early look at this upcoming product line. So at any rate, I'll be showing off what we get inside of each of these starter sets, plus we'll review each of the starter decks, core themes, and archetypes to help you guys get introduced to the Gundam card game. But before we do, remember to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, as we'll have more Gundam content in the very near future. But without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, so we're starting off with ST-01 Heroic Beginnings, which features both the RX-78 from the very first Gundam show, as well as the Gundam Aerial from The Witch from Mercury. And inside of this box, you'll have a couple inserts with some rule sheets, as well as some advertisements on Gunpla and Gundam Assemble. And then for the actual product itself, we have, of course, the Gundam Assemble runners. So this is very similar to actual Gunpla, if you guys have ever built those. You do cut out the pieces yourself and effectively assemble the miniature together, no pun intended. And you also paint it as well, very similar to like Warhammer. And then we have the starter deck, which we'll get into in a second, as well as this little bonus pack, which is basically cards out of the starter deck in a more full art version. So going into the starter deck, we have a couple copies of each LR, starting with the RX-78. This is the same one as you've seen in the beta edition. Very, very nice. I can't stress enough how cool the LRs in this game look, with just like the natural texturing that they have. And again, these are just the normal versions of the LRs. We're not even talking about alternate arts or anything if you play Digimon or One Piece. Then we have 2 copies of the Gundam Aerial Permit Score 6. Again, this is like so good. Can you imagine like how much work went into these cards? And man, just like the coloring, the rainbow, the texturing, oh man, it's really something, guys. And then going into the rest of the cards, we have 4 copies of the MA form. This is a new artwork as opposed to what was in the beta edition, but it is effectively the same card. 4 copies of the Vanilla Gun Cannon, 3 copies of the Gun Tank, 3 copies of the GM. We have 4 copies of the Gundam Aerial Vanilla, 3 copies of the Blocker Temi Trainer, 3 copies of the Zord. This is actually a pretty cool blocker for the set. Then for some pilots, we have 4 copies of Amuro Ray, 4 copies of Suletta Mercury, 3 copies of Thoroughly Damaged / Hayato Kobayashi, 3 copies of Kai's Resolve, aka Kaishiden for pilot form. Then, new card out of the set, we have 2 copies of Unforeseen Incident. And for some bases, looks like we have 3 copies of White Base, very, very powerful card from the beta edition format. And then 3 copies of the Asakasia School of Technology Earthhouse. And followed by our token cards, which is the 10 resources, of course, your EX base, EX resource, then a few actual tokens that can be produced by your cards, being the Gundam, Gun Cannon, Gun Tank, and then last but not least, we have this little inserts, like punch out card, where you can like use it as damage counters and whatnot. And now for the big moment of truth, let's see if we can get anything sweet out of this bonus pack. So, there's 1 card per pack, and the pack is a little bit flimsy, so do be a little bit careful when you're opening this. Ooh, nice, and we have a shiny version of the Vanilla Gun Cannon. Very, very nice. Of course, not one of the LRs, which you can get, but still pretty cool otherwise. Alright, so here's the blue-white starter deck laid out. It seems like this was designed to be a very balanced and beginner-friendly setup, with all the card effects being pretty straightforward. This definitely seems to be an all-rounder type of deck. The white cards have some efficient blockers and some shrink effects with aerial and unforeseen incident, whereas the blue cards seem to play around some resting effects with Amuro and the gun tank, letting you take some very efficient traits in combat, while also having some repair effects between the Kai's Resolve and the RX-78. And the Gundam MA form and white base also are great in providing some raw card economy. While these cards from the original Mobile Suit Gundam anime and the Witch from Mercury can play well together, I also think these strategies can branch out into their own decks where we get into Set 1 officially. If you want to build upon the Earth Federation and white base team setup, we'll have some really efficient units like the rare gun cannon and LR RX-78. For Witch from Mercury, we'll be getting some more Academy-centric cards like the Gundam Ferract, as well as cards that focus more on commands like the Michaelis and Aerial Rebuild. Overall, if you're someone that is relatively new to card games and or you like simple, straightforward mechanics, both of the archetypes presented in this starter deck are great places to start in my opinion. And moving into the Gundam Assemble side of things, these were honestly pretty easy to build. It only took a couple minutes per each for me. Especially if you've done gunpla before, these really require no instructions and are pretty much a cakewalk. But yeah, we get one each for each of the tokens that come out of the starter deck, so ideally that's what you will be producing as you are playing the game. And so we get one each of the RX-78, the gun tank, and the gun cannon. Again, similar to other games like Warhammer, you will have to paint these yourself. And while there still isn't really any information on how to play the Gundam Assemble game, what Bandai has recommended is that when you play your token, you put your little miniature on top to kind of make your game come to life. So that's kind of cool, I guess. Moving on, we have ST-02, which is Wings of Advance, which is a blue-green deck based around the first season of Gundam Wing. And inside, like before, you'll have your runners for your Gundam Assemble miniatures, your actual starter deck, as well as the bonus pack. So, let's get into the starter deck. We have a couple copies of the Wing Gundam, just like before from the beta. Very, very nice. Then 2 copies of the Tallgeese. This is new. This is very, very good looking. You can see the texturing and just the coloring, man. It's just so, so good. Then we have 4 copies of Bird Mode. 4 copies of this new level 5 Heavy Arms. 3 copies of the new Sandrock, 3 copies of the Maganak, 4 copies of this Leo, 3 copies of the Ares, a new 2-drop blocker in blue, then 3 copies of the Trigos, also a new blocker in blue, and then for pilots we have 4 copies of Hiro Yui, 4 copies of my favorite guy, Zex Marquise, 3 copies of Simultaneous Fire / Troa Barton, 3 copies of Peaceful Timber, aka Quattro Ribera Winner. Then a couple copies of Siege Ploy. Then for the bases, we have 3 copies of the St. Gabriel Institute. And last but not least, 3 copies of the Corsica base. And then here's your resources, your EX base and resource tokens. And then for your unit tokens, we have some amount of Leos and a few copies of the Tallgeese, plus your little token insert card. And as for the bonus pack, let's see what we get. And we have, ooh, nice, the Wing Gundam Bird Mode. This is actually a pretty good one for the ramp decks. Very, very nice. You see, without the text box, you can get the full artwork. And here's the blue-green list laid out. This one is designed to be more of a ramp strategy where you have the bird mode to accelerate your resources, plus cheap bodies to keep you alive in the early game so that you can take over the board later with your bigger units. Wing Gundam plus Hero makes a 7/7 monster that still has one of the biggest stat lines in the game going into set 1, and in the really late game we can build up to swinging twice with the Tallgeese, especially paired with Zex Marquise, to end the game out of nowhere. In set 1, you can lean even heavier to the ramp strategy with additional support like First Contact, and more powerful pieces of top end like the Death Scythe and Wing Zero. If you're someone that likes to build up to big, flashy, and explosive plays, then look no further. And moving on to the Gundam Assemble portion, yet again we have 3 miniatures that are supposed to match our tokens. So we have 2 Leos for the Oscorp, one with a assault rifle and one with a bigger rifle, I guess. And then we have the tall geese, looking very, very cool. This one would look really good when painted, I think. Alright, and now we have ST-03, Zeon's Rush, which is pretty much all about Zeon, featuring Char Zaku from the original Mobile Suit Gundam series, as well as the Sinanju from Gundam Unicorn. And inside, like before, we have our runners for our Gundam Assemble miniatures, our starter deck, and our bonus pack. So let's get into the starter deck. We have a couple copies of the new LR Sinanju, very, very cool looking. Can show off the foiling and the texturing there. Then 2 copies of the LR Char Zaku 2. Very cool. And then for the rest of the cards, we have 4 copies of Angelo's Gyara Zulu, 4 copies of the regular Gyara Zulu, 3 copies of Gaza D, 3 copies of the Draw C, and 3 copies of the 1-drop Zaku 1, 4 copies of the 2-drop Zaku 2, very, very strong card, actually. And then, one of my personal favorites as a kid, we have 3 copies of the Goof. And then for pilots, 4 copies of Full Frontal to go with our Sinanju, 4 copies of the Char S Novel to go with the Zaku, 3 copies of Indignation / Angelo Stopper, then 3 copies of Close Combat, very, very strong command card. Couple copies of the Blue Giant featuring one of my favorite guys, Ramba Ral. And then for bases, we have 3 of the Rulula. And 3 copies of the Falmel. Then we have our resource tokens as always, our EX base, EX resource. And then unit tokens being some copies of the Char Zaku 2, as well as the normal Zaku 2. Plus your little insert card. And then for the bonus pack, let's see what we get. Okay. Alright, and we have, ooh, very, very nice, the Zaku 2. While not one of the LRs, this is actually a pretty strong staple card, actually, so very happy to get this one. Alrighty, and here's the red-green list laid out. This is a very low-to-the-ground aggressive strategy with a bunch of cheap units, as you can see here. While their individual stat lines aren't super impressive, in theory this deck becomes more than the sum of its parts when we go super wide with our units early on and present a bunch of attacks on board before the opponent has the resources to deal with it. You also have the Goof and Falmel, which can produce additional token bodies, plus Full Frontal, which can also play an extra body the turn he's paired. Then you have the Sinanju to clean things up in the endgame with that high maneuverability. Zeon and Neo Zeon are designed to mesh really well together as the premier weenie aggro deck. Going into set 1, we have additional tools like the Zaku 1 Sniper type to fetch more units, as well as the rare Char Zaku and LR Char's Gelgoog as really efficient bodies that attack immediately when we have the main character in rotation. If you like fast, aggressive strategies like Mono Red in Magic, or Zoro in One Piece, or if you just really like Zeon from the show, then look no further. Alright, and here are the assemble miniatures as depicted in the box. We have the Zaku, and the Zaku. So, based on our tokens, we have the normal Zaku 2 figurines in different poses, which I actually quite like that they're in some very dynamic poses there. And then I believe this one is supposed to be the Char Zaku 2, which we would paint in red. But yeah, very nice. And last but not least, we have ST-04 Seed Strike based on the first season of Gundam Seed, with the white cards representing the Earth Alliance faction and the red cards representing Zaft. And once again inside this set, we have the runners for the Gundam Assemble pieces, the starter deck, as well as the bonus pack. So let's get right into the starter deck. We have our cover card, which is the LR Ailstrike Gundam, same as what was seen in the beta. Very, very nice. And then the new LR out of the starter deck is Aegis. One of my personal favorites. Very, very nice with the texturing and the coloring there. Then we have 4 copies of the Level 4 Strike Gundam, 4 copies of the Mobius Zero, 3 copies of the 1-1 Blocker Mobius, 3 copies of the Level 2 Strike Dagger, 4 copies of the Aegis Gundam MA form, then 3 copies of Gin, 3 copies of Miguel's Gin, and then for pilots we have 4 copies of Kira Yamato, very powerful card from the beta format, then 4 copies of Athrin Zala, and 3 copies of Striker Pack, very impactful commands coming out of the starter deck, 3 copies of the Hawk of Endymion, just 2 copies of the Magic Bullet of Dusk, and then for bases we have 3 copies of the Archangel, and 3 copies of the Vesalius, followed by our resources, our EX base, EX resource as always, and then for the token units we have the Ailstrike Gundam blocker that can be made off of your Striker Pack, so 2 copies of that, 2 copies of Launcher Strike Gundam token, so 2/4 blocker, as well as Sword Strike Gundam, which, again, all of these are made from the Striker Pack card that I noted out earlier. And then for the bonus pack, let's see what we got. And we have, ooh, very nice, a foil version of the Striker Pack. So, as you can see, it's full art without the text box. And yeah, very good card. Alright, and here's the full red-white deck displayed out. For the white cards, we have some efficiently statted bodies and blockers in the form of Ailstrike, Mobius, and Striker Pack. Hawk of Endymion and Ailstrike can return enemy units to the hand to gain you tempo, and Kira's ability to shrink a unit's AP by 2 lets your units dispatch opposing units very handily. In red, we care more about boosting our units' attack stats with cards like Vesalius and Athrin to trade profitably in combat. Like ST01, this is a pretty simple all-rounder deck to start with, but in my opinion these two factions seem to split off into their own strategies when going into set 1. Earth Alliance in white becomes a very blocker-centric deck, with having more support like the Strike Rouge and Archangel to reset your units into active after attacking. This archetype can also build up to the new Freedom Gundam in set 1, which becomes a huge brick wall against the opponent. On the other hand, Zaft seems to go in the opposite direction. While this faction's identity isn't too well represented in this starter deck, set 1 leads us into a lot of things that boost AP, while other units like the Aegis Gundam benefit from getting to 5 AP. There are cards like Buster Gundam and the Desert Tiger that provide significant power boosts, and solid payoffs like the Lago. However, there can be some merit to playing red-white like this to be able to link pair with Justice Gundam since Athrin is only in red currently. Similar to ST01, ST04 doesn't seem to show a ton of identity to these factions, but many of these cards like Striker Pack, Kira, Athrin, Ailstrike, and Aegis do slot well in multiple decks for their respective colors. And moving on to the assemble portion, we have our 3 units right here with the Sword Strike Gundam, very nice, the Launcher Strike Gundam, and man, I gotta tell you, I really like how intricate the detailing is on these miniatures. And last but not least, we have the Sky Grasper fighter jet. Now, what's weird about this one, unlike the other starter decks, is that it doesn't exactly match the tokens that we got. So we do have the Sword Strike and Launcher Strike, but not the Ailstrike, which that's actually a gimmick with the Sky Grasper, is that they do give you a few extra pieces that you can put onto your Launcher Strike to make it into the Ailstrike, if you so choose. It's a little bit strange that the product didn't just come with the pieces to build the Ailstrike by itself, but what can you do? So at this point, I'm just gonna gush for a bit here. I really love Gundam. It's a franchise that I've enjoyed since I was a small child, from the compelling characters, the rich world building, the badass robots fighting on my TV screen, and the intricate details coming to life on the model kits. As someone that has also played TCGs for many years, the new Gundam card game checks all the boxes for me. With that said, I also may be incredibly biased, but I think Bandai hit a home run with these starter decks. Of course, there are some criticisms that can be had with the value proposition of putting miniatures with trading cards, plus the minutia with how the products were physically packaged, but aside from that, I think these starter decks are a great launch point for folks getting into the hobby, whether it be TCGs in general or Gundam as a series. With regards to the question of what is the best starter deck, I really don't think there's a huge difference in power level between them. Marginally, I think ST01 and ST02 are the strongest out of the box, but I really do think all 4 decks have cards that would be staples in their respective archetypes as Set 1 releases. My honest recommendation is to just pick up the starter deck that best matches your playstyle, and or the ones that represent your favorite mobile suits or characters in the series. Now let's talk about Gundam Assemble. If it's not your cup of tea, I totally get it. The normal starter decks without the miniatures are great products to get as well. It is a bit disappointing that Assemble's release was delayed to next year, but I think the miniatures still look good, and I'm excited to hear more about that game regardless. At any rate, I rambled on long enough. You've listened to my thoughts for this long, so it's only fair that I listen to yours too, so feel free to post them down in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching, as always, and we'll see you in the next one.